Welcome to the Limit Free Life Show. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host. I bring you tips, advice, and guest stories about creating work you love. Whatever type of career or business you have or want, I want to help you find more meaning, money, and happiness. Now we are live from Hollywood. Hello, and welcome to this week's Limit Free Life Show. So happy to have you here. I'm very excited to bring a guest on today who will really appeal to the broad audience that I have, both entrepreneurs who are hiring and training and trying to create a fabulous team to support their business, as well as those people who are in career transition and job seeking. So I have with me today Andrea Hoffer. And I'm going to tell you a little about Andrea. I'm very excited that she is going to share all kinds of fabulous information with us today. Andrea has been in the business of hiring, leading, and motivating people for over 25 years. She is currently the founder and CEO of AHA Business Consulting. The core purpose of AHA is to give leaders their time and freedom back by helping them attract, engage, and retain team members who believe in and support their vision. Andrea, a former spa owner where she managed 35 employees, knows firsthand the everyday challenges of motivating employees, exceeding customer expectations, and meeting business and revenue goals. She struggled with high turnover and lack of good candidates and is now helping companies to recruit, hire, onboard, and engage their team members. Her talks speak to business owners, CEOs, and organizational leaders. She will inspire your audience to take action with her clear-cut action steps that have proven to get results. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have you here, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say because I think this is a fascinating topic. There's just so much that people need to learn about hiring and training and communication with employees, and that is a constant struggle that I hear entrepreneurs talk about, how to make that work. I think some people just, I don't know, I don't even think they go into business sometimes because that part of it is also daunting. And then for the job seekers, I think hearing it from the employer's perspective is really interesting to learn, you know, the how the hiring process is seen from their eyes. So without further ado, I'd love to have you give us a little background on yourself and how you got into this. I read a little, but I know there's more to the story.
Sure. Well, thank you again. Some background. Let's see. In your bio, you mentioned how I owned a spa for 10 years. I was a franchisee. So that's actually, franchising is near and dear to my heart. I love working with franchisees and franchisors because often the franchisor doesn't always provide information to the franchisee about how to motivate and hire and really train your team to be behind, what your purpose is.
Right.
So I enjoy working with them. When I was a franchisee, as you stated in my bio, I had a lot of turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself, even though I came from a background where I learned the correct way to interview and the correct way to hire and to have a very specific process, and I did it for many years, I just threw it all into the wind when I was a business owner. It was just, so many things that needed to be done day to day. Yeah. And at one point I said, I really wish there was a company out there that I could just outsource that part to.
Okay.
That really would help me with that. And I guess eventually that's what I ended up doing.
I love that. I love that because you were, boots on the ground seeing the need for this. So that's actually very cool.
Yeah. And, and one of the reasons I did it was because as I was in that position, I started taking some of the tools I had learned in my previous positions and researching best practices for now and put some programs in place to help me recruit effectively. And a lot of the things were working. Yeah. And so I had a lot of questions from other franchisees saying, can you could you share this with me?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how I started to integrate that part into my consulting business, which already existed.
Okay. So if you go back to when you had the high turnover, can you look back now and see, well, A, why that might have been, and B, was it preventable?
That's a good question. I think part yes, part no.
Okay.
There's certain positions that sometimes you are going to have turnover. And, there's certain positions that could be transitional. It
Right.
could be that somebody it's a part-time job they have while they go to school.
Right.
Whether they're in college, or we had a lot of nursing students, until they figure out or finish what they need to do to go into what their career is.
Right.
A lot of the positions I hired for were customer service and sales hourly positions.
Okay.
But and which I believe everybody at some point in their career should have for a couple of years, because I think that background is a very strong background for just about any industry, any field.
Yeah, we had this conversation. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I did my share of customer service jobs from scooping ice cream to, waitressing, and I still look back on those as some of my best learning experiences. Ran a retail store. It's funny. I mean, it's decades and decades ago, but yeah, very solid skills that you develop doing those jobs, and I hope all the young people out there will have some experience doing them as well.
Yeah, and just to continue to address your question, I'm a really big believer in always be recruiting. Just like you hear always be selling,
Yeah.
it's the same thing with recruiting, and especially with the job market, the way it has been the last couple of years, and the way it's going. People don't stay in jobs until they retire anymore. It's not as common as it used to be. And if you want to just constantly be filling your pipeline with people, letting them know, hey, maybe you don't have an opening right now, but these are the openings we may have in the future. This is what our company's doing. Nurturing them, and that way you have a base to go to when you do have an opening, and you're not so like hectic to just get a warm body for a seat, because that never ends up well. And even for the hourly positions, I mean, what we instituted that we found worked very well was regular group informational interviews. They were 90-minute interviews. They were interactive. They learned things. And it was very successful. And what we found was a lot of the candidates at the end, and we would tell them this in the beginning, we would say, if this isn't for you, please let us know. And, thank you for trying it out. And we had, usually at least 1 to 3 candidates for every group interview that would tell us that. They'd say, you know what, I enjoyed the experience. I learned so much, and I'm going to, be an advocate for your business, but this job is not for me. And I would always say, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad, because then, now we didn't waste each other's time. I hope they really did learn something and had a great experience, and now we can move on.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Can you just tell us just briefly what happens in a group interview? Because I do know people who are intimidated by just that idea, and so they don't go to the interview at all because I don't know what they think they're going to be speaking in front of the group or whatever. But what happens in a group interview?
So I can't talk for every single group interview out there. I can tell you about the format that we designed and used for my company, and now that we use with our clients.
Okay.
And the reason we call it a group informational interview is because we're not only evaluating them, really 80% of the interview is for them to get to know us and what the needs of the job are.
Okay.
So that they can evaluate if they're the right fit.
Okay.
So we make it very as little low risk as possible for them. We try to make them very comfortable.
Okay.
I come from a training background. I'm a facilitator. It's ingrained in me. I always say I'm a teacher at heart. So we approach it in that way. Are you going to have to speak in front of others in the group? Yes. But we do it in a fun way. We actually have a little card game that helps us to get to know them a little better, and also helps them get to know the job a little better. We do role plays with them. It's not what you would consider a traditional interview where you're answering what you think are traditional questions in front of everybody.
Okay.
It lets us know, it gives us a feel for how they can be in front of other people. And are they a team player? Do they listen to each other? Do they piggyback on what somebody else said instead of just trying to make themselves shine?
Interesting.
I find it to be very, very effective and fun. That we always tell them, we want you to have fun.
Right.
And they usually do.
Yeah. And so when you do that, do you do that on behalf of an employer, or do you teach the employers how to do this for themselves?
Both. I have some employers like me to come in, or one of my facilitators to do it for them. But at this point, we have a little training program. It comes with the cards, it comes with the script, even email scripts that we sell. I think it's pretty, low cost, like $99. And then a lot of our clients who are in our like ongoing recruitment program, we include a Zoom training program. So they get all these scripts and everything, but then we actually walk them through and let them practice with us. But most people find that it's pretty easy to follow.
Okay. Yeah, fascinating. So this ongoing recruiting, that is something that you would recommend to any employer, really. I mean, I could see that because most of the people I know are desperately looking for somebody when they lose somebody, and they really don't have a pool of people to call. It's starting from scratch every time. And now that you're saying it, it's such an obvious thing to kind of, make sure that you don't fall into that, but I don't see people doing it. So that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, even because you're growing. It doesn't even have to be that you think you're going to lose somebody. Most business owners are on a track for growth. And typically, in order to grow, you need more people.
Right.
And
yeah, great. Okay. All right. So what else? This was a great point. I'd love to hear more.
Okay. So was there something specific you wanted?
Yeah, okay. I just made that very hard.
I could talk for hours about lots of things.
I just find this whole topic really interesting. So maybe, yeah, you're right. This was the tail end of an earlier question. So how about this? Some of the bigger mistakes that employers might be making in their either hiring or interviewing process.
Sure. One of the biggest mistakes I see in hiring is they're pretty sure they need somebody, and it may even be to fill a position that was just vacant.
Okay.
But they're not very clear on what they need. And if they're not clear on the needs of the position, what this person is going to do each day, it doesn't have to be the specific task, but it does have to be what results they're planning on seeing from a successful person in this position.
Okay.
And they also need to be clear on their core values. Okay. And, I like to call the core values the guideposts. These are, and there's so much information out there about core values, but I like to kind of simplify it. These are the 4 to 6 measurements or guides, or basically these are the things that everybody in your organization abides by. It's how they show up at work. It's what's most important to them as they're doing their job. Their values. You want to hire people who can relate to your organizational values. And, often when we start working with a client, they bring me their values, and it's just a list of, good words, like honesty
Yeah.
and openness, but it's not clearly defined. Honesty or openness can mean anything to a lot of people. So we typically work with our clients and encourage them to really dig in. What does that mean? How does that look? How does that show up every day in your business? Because if you don't know that, you're not going to be able to recognize a good interview answer.
Right. Right.
And the way I typically ask people to start off is to start writing down their stories. They're good and they're bad stories. Every time, and they don't need to sit down and do this an hour a week. It can be just as it comes up, you kind of jot it down for a while. So the good stories are the stories you just love to talk about, the ones where one of your team members just hit it out of the park. They were so great. They made a customer feel really good. They went the extra mile, but it's how they went the extra mile. What did they do that you made it, that you feel that it went the extra mile? So write those stories down. And then the bad stories are the stories about hopefully your former team members, the ones where they didn't quite make the mark. Maybe they weren't resourceful enough, or they didn't really make your customer feel the way you want your customer to feel. And again, be as specific as possible, and you'll start to see patterns with these stories. And from that, you can connect them to your core values and really know what your guiding posts are for your company. And then as you do the hiring, and one thing I always say is you can't just set your core values and forget about them. And, you need to integrate it, not just in your hiring, but in your onboarding, in how you recognize your team members. We used to, at my spa, we made these little thank you cards that had our core values on it. And every time a team member did something that we really felt lived one of our core values, we wrote specifically, we circled the core value on the card, and we wrote specifically what they did, thanking them for it, and gave it to them. And that took off like wildfire, because everybody started giving them to each other. I would walk into the spa and I would see them all over the hallways, especially
great.
In the break room, in the office. We ran out of wall space.
Wow.
But it's just another simple way to keep your core values alive and to show your team that it's important to you.
Oh, I love that so much. And I love the whole conversation, because everything is mirroring, from the hiring manager side over to the potential employee side. They mirror one another, because I always tell job seekers to write up their stories and to think of their core values, actually, so that, if somebody asks them an interview question, they have a story about, that will illustrate how they use their strengths in a previous job or something like that, versus just saying I have the strength, or however they're going to phrase it. But I just love this, because I think stories they really resonate. They're really something people can understand, and they are more specific. And so, I think for all the hiring managers or the business owners out there, what you just described is a great exercise for them to do, to sit down and really think these things through. And figuring out the stories is a great way to really delve a little more deeply into the core values. That's great. That's a great tip.
And people. Michelle, I'm so glad that you said that how when you work with job seekers, that you recommend for them to write down their stories, because that is probably one of the things that I see candidates falling short on. And I'll explain what I mean. First of all, when I work with employers and help them to write good, solid interview questions, most of the interview questions will ask for a specific example. And we actually capitalize those two words, specific example, because we want the candidate to share with us a story illustrating how they, whatever the question is, how, how they lived in a similar situation in the past. So if we're encouraging employers to ask for these specific examples, it's helpful for the candidates to have these stories in their back pocket.
Yeah.
And some of their stories, some of their examples could apply to several different questions.
Right.
And I remember, I guess I was a bit of an interview nerd when I was interviewing many years ago. One of the things that I did was I had this notebook where I actually and this is when I wasn't even looking for a job, but as things happened where I got more experience in whatever position I was in, or I had some sort of success, or maybe I just learned from a failure, I would jot those experiences in this notebook and review them when I did have an interview. So it was on the tip of my tongue. So I had it ready. Because often candidates won't do that and they don't remember what they accomplished.
Right. And they're on the spot. They might be a little bit nervous. It's a really hard time to, be in the mind space where you can go in and remember things. So like you say, to have those, I prefer writing them down. I think whenever you write something, it's a little more it's easier to remember, and to practice a little bit, and just to have those, to remember these, a few top of mind stories that you can bring up in an interview. But I think that is so interesting. And I don't think, unless people are told to come up with stories, whether it's on the employer side or the other side, I'm not sure they think of that as much, especially on the employer side. Actually, I think that's fascinating for them to do that as well. So.
And the stories are great just for recruiting in general. You don't, it's not just for interviewing. Sharing some of your employee stories, your team member stories on your career site or in your social media.
Oh, great idea.
Is wonderful for attracting future team members.
Yeah.
Because the right people, the ones who relate to your values, will relate to the story.
Right.
And they'll start following you, so that when you do have an opening, they're right there. They'll hear about it and they'll jump on it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, the story about the cards. I mean, I would think anyone looking for a job is going to see that and just instantly, make some assumptions about what the environment is like there that are pretty positive. So, yeah, very, very cool. So, okay, so your suggestion is to recruit often, to do these group interviews, and to come up with those core values and the stories. Anything else that's super important that we're missing here in terms of finding the right folks?
So sometimes when I say this, people challenge me on it. And so I've sort of changed the word, but I'm gonna say what I used to say to employers, and when I do interview training, is it's okay to let the candidate fail. And so I've gotten a lot of pushback on that. And what I mean by that, and now I've changed the wording to let it hang, leave it hanging, and I'll explain what that means. If you look at how we ask interview questions, we hate to let people fail. Sure. We typically we want to help them.
Right.
And silence is often difficult for us. Yeah. But when we ask interview questions in the past, we would say something like, so tell me about a time you had a really difficult problem at work and how you succeeded. How did you fix it? So a good interview question is actually to leave that second part out. That's what I mean by leave it hanging. Is just say, could you tell me about a time when you had a really difficult problem at work? And you might be a little more specific, but just leave it there. Now, the really good candidates are going to have a specific example to share with you, and they will also share how they resolved it, or if they didn't resolve it, what they learned from it. typically the candidates that may not be the right fit will just tell you about the problem, and they'll go on about the problem. And you're going to want to say, well, how did you resolve it? If you ask them how they resolved it, they will find a way to answer that. But if you leave it hanging, then, you kind of learned a little bit more about them. They didn't take the problem on themselves and find a way to solve it.
Got it. Yeah, that's excellent. Okay. While we're on this, the question I think that's the biggest stumper for people is, and I just would love your take on the best way to answer the initial question of tell me about yourself, because I think you can go so many directions with that.
It's really funny. I knew you were going to say that. When you said that there was a difficult question, a couple of months ago, I was actually on an HR podcast as a guest, and one of their last questions of me is, what's the worst interview question you've ever been asked? And I said, tell me about yourself. That is really a horrible interview question. First of all, for employers, I don't recommend you ever asking
I love that
question.
Okay.
And there are a couple of reasons. First of all, you shouldn't ask any interview question if you don't specifically know what you're trying to get from that. What are you listening for in the response?
Yeah.
So if somebody says, tell me about yourself, it could go a million different ways. The other reason it's a really poor question is because it could bring up personal information you are not supposed to learn in an interview. And just because you didn't specifically ask a question that you're not supposed to ask, the fact that you learn that information in an interview could potentially be a risk. So that's why I really feel that is not a good interview question to ask. It's a waste of time. For candidates, if you are asked that, I would direct it so that it is very focused on the job and how the job fits into your career, how your past experience has prepared you for this position, and how you're passionate about this position because it's in line with where you want to go with your career.
Totally love that. Totally agree. Don't get into the kids and where they go to school and all the other things, and keep it exactly what you said. Thank you. That's great. Okay, so since all of this really is about communication, let's get into a little bit beyond hiring into onboarding, which not everybody has a system for that, but one should, and maybe you can explain, what that's about. And let's start there.
Sure. So often, we hire somebody, we're really excited, we know they're going to be great, but if we don't onboard them well, it is, we might be setting them up for failure. Okay. So everything you do, you want to be setting them up for success. And I always say it's important to have at least their first 2 weeks outlined for them before they even come, even if it's not, hour by hour what they're doing, right? But what are they learning each day? Who's taking them to lunch? What are some things that are happening in the office they need to be aware of? If they have a desk, they have an office, have it ready for them. The computer should be working with software, a nameplate if that's part of your culture. Some welcoming balloons is nice.
I love this.
Some kind of swag that represents your company, but also is a welcome, even if it's just a mug. Even when I hire people who are virtual, I send them an AHA mug so that they have some part of the business with them, no matter where they are. Things like that help to ingratiate them into the company pretty quickly.
Could I
You
interrupt you
also,
for 1 second? Because I think
sure,
this is so interesting. I'm just really curious. How many people or how many employers are you finding actually, have these systems in place when you meet them?
not a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it varies from client to client.
Mhm.
I've had, and the thing is, I can tell a, a, a lot of the clients I work with are part of our subscription programs. So we're
Okay.
doing ongoing recruitment for them. So we're seeing the the turnover, and we get to see we get a peek into their onboarding,
Right.
and not even their onboarding, but their initial communication
Yeah.
with candidates. And um, what I'm seeing a lot of is they've gone through the process to hire a good person. The person's not starting for another 2 weeks. It might even be 2 months for
Okay.
certain level positions. And then communication stops.
Mm. Okay.
What happens is that candidate still has resumes out there. Somebody
Mm.
contacts them for an interview, they're not going to pass it up.
Right.
You want to continue to be in contact with them up until the day they start with you.
Okay.
Even if it's, having different people from the team reach out to them
Mm-hmm.
and welcome them,
Yeah.
getting them excited. And this is really where I'm seeing a lot of our clients falling short. They're not ready for them.
Yeah.
Sometimes the candidate might be ready to start tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
and the employer is not ready for them to start for another 2 weeks.
Right.
And so having those things in place ahead of time makes a big difference in that retention, because those first 90 days are from the day they're hired. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
their start date, the
Mm-hmm.
day they accept the offer.
Right.
Actually, even the day they apply are just so key.
Yeah.
So, to answer your question, I'm I'm not seeing it consistent with every employer to having all those pieces in place. And you know what? Nobody's perfect. I'm not
Right.
saying I'm perfect.
Right.
It's so much easier to be that armchair coach many times. I just know that I see certain things that contribute to that lower retention.
Yeah, I find this fascinating because the impression that you make on that employee at the very beginning, that's lasting, and that could make the difference between somebody who walks in and thinks, "Oh wow, maybe I made a mistake," and this person who's just thrilled to be there and ready to give it their best. So that's really very interesting.
It's funny. It just reminded me of the story when you said that. We had a couple of years ago, a prospective client called us, and they said, we have tons of people that want to work for us. The recruiting was not their issue, like
Okay.
getting people to apply.
Right.
It was that they weren't staying on top of the applications, and
Okay.
people would fall into this black hole. And I hear that a lot. So they didn't have a process set up or anybody to manage it. And the reason that the CEO picked the phone and called us was because she said, they were very big on their core values,
Mm-hmm.
and they spent a lot of time developing them, and they truly lived them in the organization. And one of their core values, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something about always following up.
Mm.
And one of their applicants sent her an email and said, I read your core values. I was very excited about them until I never heard back from you, even though I have emailed you several times.
Mm.
So obviously you don't live your core values. So, and that puts a bad impression in the candidates. These are people who could end up, whether they work for you or not,
Yeah.
they could end up bad mouthing your company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it can affect your sales.
Right.
So that, that's when it kind of hit home for her that they've done all this work to really build their culture and live it, but they weren't living it in the candidate experience.
Boy, that's really interesting. And I do think as I'm listening, I'm thinking, yeah, a lot of us, it's such a hurdle to find the right person and get them on board and hire them, that I think a lot of times they feel that it's done at that point. You know, the person must be grateful and happy to have a job, and we've got a person. And so what you're talking about is this continuum where the process doesn't stop there. And
Right. And
yeah,
actually, a few months ago, I did a workshop on millennials. And I don't often talk about millennials. I typically like to talk just about people in
right,
general.
right.
But this organization really wanted something specific millennials. And, you know, as I did my research and I put this together, I'm like, this really applies to everybody.
Right.
But so I thought I would share a few things I learned
Yeah,
from that,
great.
if that works.
Oh, works.
So, um, you know, one of the first things is to really show them that you care. You know, from the interview process all the way through. But I'm really talking about right now that first 90 days and even beyond that. You know, check in with them. How are they doing? Do they have everything they need to do their job successfully? Is this what they expected? Or did they expect something different? You know, really showing them that you care about them as a person because they want to be valued as a person, but you also care about them as somebody who's going to help them grow in their career. Candidates really want to improve their skills. They really want to move up the food chain, so to speak. That, you know, they want a career. It's one of the big things I hear all the time when we do interviews is, well, what are the growth opportunities? And they're not just talking about money. Money is important. That is definitely still number one. But probably number two, number three is, but you know, what am I going to learn from this? How am I going to grow from it?
Right.
Were you going to ask a question?
I was just going to say, I think it's such a misconception on the part of the employers that the money is as, I mean, they overblow how important the money is. And I think you're right. I see that a lot where they hire and then they don't challenge the employers, or they don't know what they want in terms of growth. And it's just a giant mistake, in my opinion, because the employee doesn't matter how much money they're making, if they get bored or if they feel like nobody's noticing what they're doing, it's done, basically. I mean, you've lost them as far as their interest and their motivation. So,
yeah. And the second thing they really want to know is their purpose.
That's right.
What is the purpose of the company? What's the mission? Why are we doing this? But also, how do I fit in? How do I contribute to the overall mission? And every position contributes in some way, and to letting them know that they're important, and without them, you know, we couldn't do what we do. And how that works is very important to them. And even, you know, encouraging them to socialize. You know, sometimes we're nervous about, or maybe I shouldn't generalize, but I've heard employers sometimes be concerned about team members getting too close, you know, because they don't want to have cliques, or they're just afraid if one person in that group leaves, everybody's going to leave.
Right.
It does work the other way around. I saw that with my spa. My team was extremely close, and I know that contributed to my retention. And a lot of it had nothing to do with me. It was just that they all formed a very close bond.
Yeah.
So encouraging them to, you know, they don't have to be best friends with their coworkers. That's not necessary, but that it's okay to socialize. And then the last thing that we're really seeing, and I really find this funny, because for years in organizational development, you know, we've always talked about managing change and how change scares employees. And we have to, you know, roll it out correctly, and we might lose a certain number of people. And that's still true to a certain extent. You still need to manage it correctly. But one of the things we're hearing from employees, they often leave jobs because there isn't change, because their employer isn't innovating. They're not looking into the best technology or the new way of of doing something. They're not keeping it fresh. And, that sometimes will turn candidates off. They want to be learning the newest technology and really be ahead of the curve and be with a company that is ahead of the curve. So then they'll start looking elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true and so interesting. I'm loving this conversation. What just in terms of, we saw the need for the onboarding system, like an actual system, and I thought the details you gave on that were great. What about just general communication between employers and their team? New, old, just whoever.
So
go ahead. I didn't know if I was clear enough.
One thing I recommend day one to do with your new hire and then continue the conversation regularly is to talk about expectations from each other. And not just about expectations of, these are the results we want to see, but also expectations around communication. So everybody communicates differently, and it will bring your employee by leaps and bounds so quick if you understand how they communicate and they understand how you communicate. And we often use a tool called DISC to help with this. But you can even just sit down. We have a list of questions we typically recommend to go through. They're not long, I think 5 or 7 questions. It can be as simple as, how do you prefer to get difficult feedback? And both the manager or the employer and the new hire are to answer that. Right. What is your preferred communication method? And is it email? Is it text? Do you like a lot of face-to-face? How often do you want me to check in? Just laying it all on the table day one, when there's no baggage, and then using it, and then even simple things about, when's your birthday? How do you like to celebrate? Because some people like to take their birthday off, and that may or may not work with your company, but it's good to know it up front. You may be able to make it work for them instead of waiting until that day creeps up on you.
Well, what would you say to the employer who has a variety of team members who all have different needs in those departments? One wants to be left alone, one wants regular communication. Does that seem overwhelming to them, or what do they do with that?
It can be overwhelming. It's a learning process. I'm a note taker. I always took notes. I had a little spreadsheet because I had 35 employees.
Right.
So I didn't always remember, one thing from next. At some point I might ask, what do you like to do in your day off? And then, in a casual conversation, or sometimes we did it as a workshop, I would keep that note. So then if I knew later on I wanted to reward them, if it's somebody who likes to get their nails done, I'd, give them a gift certificate to the nail place. So I think keeping notes, is helpful. And there's lots of software to help you with that as well.
Right.
I used to have, one of my first jobs was I was the director of a tour program at a college.
Oh, cool.
And I had 25 employees, part-time, tour guides, and they'd come at all different shifts. And I would talk with them for maybe 2 to 5 minutes, depending upon how early they came before their tour and how long so I would write down, as soon as they left, I would write down something they shared with me. Maybe they had an exam that week, or, it was their anniversary with their boyfriend or something. And I would write it down so that the next week I would remember to ask them about it when they came in.
Right.
So you just have to do little things to remind yourself. But I'm not going to say it's easy, because it's not always easy.
No, I'm sure it's not easy, but at the same time, the benefits are worth the time and energy. So not only are you putting, you're keeping people happy and engaged and wanting to work for you longer, but I feel like it will be reflected in your profitability and the results of your company. And I mean, everything is impacted by this. So, yeah. I hate to tell you, I hate for this to end, but we have 5 more minutes. So, I want you to give people an idea of some of the many things that you do, because there are a number of things, and also to introduce our audience to your new podcast.
Thank you. Yes. So I will be launching a new podcast. It's called Home Run Hiring. We should be launching within about a month. We've already started recording some of the episodes. And if you would like to be notified when we launch, if you can go to homerunhiring.com, and there's a little sign up form there. That's also will bring you to the AHA Business Consulting website if you want to learn more about us. But we work with employers to help them find the right team members for their organization, and we also help them keep them happy. So about 80% of what we do is actually recruiting. We do everything from complete ongoing outsourced recruiting, where we just take it over for an employer, to doing training around interviewing and recruiting and best methods for onboarding. So as I said earlier, I'm a teacher at heart. I do a lot of speaking regarding this. So if you also you have an organization that it needs a speaker to come in and talk about best methods around interviewing and hiring or keeping your team engaged, please reach out. I love speaking with groups.
That's fabulous. Thank you. And I would imagine every employer out there is thinking, oh my gosh, I would love her on my team. This would take such a huge part of my work that I'm not enjoying or not doing well off my hands. So it's a really valuable service. And I think it's wonderful that you came up with it from a place of need when you were a business owner, and you're still a business owner, but a different business owner. So thank you so much for coming on. I think this has been so enlightening, and I personally just enjoyed our conversation so much. Kind of hoping that you might come back sometime with some other topics.
Love to.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And audience, please go and sign up for the new podcast. And will your podcast be basically training people on things like this? Will it be oriented that way?
Yes. So it's interesting. I took a different approach than I normally do when I speak with the podcast, but it seems to be working, where I'm sharing some personal stories, but then integrating it with actual action steps that you can take to improve whatever the specific topic is. We just recorded one on using assessments and in the hiring process. So that's one of them. But we also will talk about interviewing techniques and recruiting techniques and things that will give you exact steps to take to improve in a certain area.
Wonderful. I think that is really valuable information, and I'm so glad that I'll be listening. I know that. So thank you so much. And I think all the business owners out there would benefit from that. It really is somewhat of an unknown territory for people, I think, and really, really great that they have some resources in you. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it, Andrea.
Thank you, Michelle. I enjoyed it.
Good.
Have a good day.
Great. You too. And audience, thank you as well. Love that you show up here at 1 o'clock on Wednesdays at ubngo.com. Thank you, ubngo.com. And you'll be able to find the podcast on all the major podcast platforms, and you can find it on the Limit Free Life YouTube channel and my Facebook page. So we love to bring tips and advice to entrepreneurs and to job seekers and people trying to get out there and create super successful careers, make more money, find more fulfillment. So I hope that's you, and I hope you're out there this week seeing what you can create. Have a great week.